I never expected to encounter true terror while working as a pizza delivery driver. I thought my job was just a mundane way to make some extra cash while in college. That is, until that fateful night. It was a New Year's Eve, and a multitude of orders started pouring in as people all around the city celebrated. I was tasked with delivering pizzas to a residential area on the outskirts of town. The directions were straightforward, but as I drove towards my destination, a sense of unease started to brew within me. The roads were dark and desolate. Houses were few and far between, and the only sounds I could hear were the hum of my car's engine and rustling of the trees in the wind. My unease grew as I neared a crossroad where my GPS showed that I had to turn left. The road that lay ahead looked sinister. It was narrow and twisted, with tall trees looming on both sides with their branches scratching my car's roof. A creepy thought crossed my mind. What if I got lost here, or what if my car broke down? I shuddered at the thought but dismissed my unfamiliar surroundings and continued driving. When I reached the turn, something strange caught my eye. There was something ahead, stationary at the intersection, beyond the reach of my headlights. As I slowed down, I realized that it was an old, rusty bicycle with a pizza box strapped to the side. There was no rider in sight, and the bicycle seemed to have been abandoned there for a while. I couldn't help but feel chills run down my spine as it looked like a warning of some sort. Fear started gnawing at me as I remembered all the tales I'd heard of missing drivers in such areas. But it was New Year's Eve, the roads were likely to be empty, and it was just my paranoid mind playing tricks on me. So, shaking off my goosebumps, I took a deep breath and carried on down the eerie slog. I never expected to encounter true terror while working as a pizza delivery driver, but that fateful New Year's Eve changed my life forever. As I drove down the narrow, dark road, my anxiety reached its limit. Suddenly, my headlights illuminated a figure in the distance. It was walking towards me, slowly but surely. At first, I thought it was someone who needed my help, but as the figure approached, I realized that there was something sinister about it. It was a human-like figure, but it was twisted and distorted. Its eyes glowed red in the darkness, and its long arms reached towards me. I felt instantly paralyzed as it crept closer and closer, taunting me. I could smell its foul breath a mile away and shuddered. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I remembered that I had a spare pizza box in the passenger seat. Something told me I had to use it as a weapon. I grabbed the box, then threw it at the creature as hard as I could. To my surprise, it staggered and fell to the ground, howling. I quickly stepped on the gas and drove away, all the while looking in my rearview mirror to make sure it didn't follow me. When I finally reached my destination, I was shaking with fear. I still don't know what it was or where it came from, but it felt more like a nightmare than anything from the waking world. Since then, I've quit my job as a pizza delivery driver, as the thought of encountering that creature again terrified me. I now warn anyone who wants to venture out on the roads at night to be careful, lest they come across the same evil that I experienced. The night was dark and dreary as I took another turn on the winding road. The pitter-patter of rain seemed to grow louder with each passing second, but I was on a pizza delivery mission, and nothing was going to hold me back. It wasn't long until I felt like I'd been driving for hours and still hadn't reached my destination. The GPS kept sending me in circles, but my true north kept demanding a change in direction. Suddenly, a figure emerged out of the darkness, holding an umbrella but very convincingly signaling me to stop. Instinctively, I slowed down and inquired if he needed any help. I'll never forget how he said, "Hey boy, is this the way to the XYZ hotel?" He spoke in a hushed voice that somehow carried an eerie undertone, but it was hard for me to pinpoint just why my hairs stood on end as I confirmed the location for him and watched him disappear into the night. As I continued driving, I couldn't shake the unnerving feeling off. Delivering pizzas in various neighborhoods night after night had never felt quite like this before. As one consideration led to another, my car ended up running out of gas in an obscure alleyway with no sign of populated life form. What would have been a perplexing but undoubtedly arbitrary experience took a twisted turn when the phone that I acquired through my delivery job started malfunctioning. The The thin drizzle outside had grown thicker, and all I could hear now were the deafening sounds of the rain and the occasional storm rumble in the distance. I contemplated and wondered, do I walk hoping to find help or stay put and wait for passing by help? As I obliquely opened my doors out of the driver's seat, I heard scratching, and then even louder thumping. I peered behind myself, stared through the misty windshield, and realized that I wasn't alone in the car. A pair of ice-cold yellow eyes were fixed upon me. Eyes that belonged to something that should have forgotten its way through a portal from the darkest pits of hell. As I froze, twiddled my escape protocol, and clawed towards the door handle, the creature started moving, its large frame slithered over me, and I felt its cold scales pressing on my skin. For a moment, it seemed as if the creature would consume me whole, but instead, it hissed at me before darting away. It took me a few moments to realize that it wasn't a demon or monster, but simply a stray cat that had slipped into my car to shelter itself from the rain. Breathing heavily, I tried to steady my racing heart. But just as I had begun feeling relief, a knock sounded on the window. My eyes shot towards the direction of the sound, but all I could see was a vague outline of a person standing at the edge of the dark alley. "Are you okay?" they shouted through the glass, barely audible above the sound of the storm. Their voice only served to add to the list of irrational fears my mind had conjured during this strange incident. So there I was, sitting in my car at the dead of night, in the middle of nowhere, with no way to call for help, and no feasible way out, not even a horrific, supernatural creature to battle. Eventually, overwhelmed with exhaustion and drained from the ordeal, I must have lost consciousness. When I woke up, the sun was up, but I was still in the same spot. But my car was no longer alone in the alley. Emergency vehicles littered the scene with their flashing red and blue lights. The help had finally arrived. Behind me in the trunk of my car, 2 large pizzas, still untouched. Piecing together fragments from the retelling narratives, police concluded that I had fallen asleep in my car, mistook those events for something more sinister, as my brain concocted visions of horror while in the delirium of impending hypothermia, and the stranger in the middle of night checking on me turned out to be the undisputed hero who had seen me stranded, alerted rescue services, and saved my life. Although I could never fully shake the sense of fear and paranoia, I had been jolted awake by that twist of fate to remember that not everything is sinister. Our minds conjure up terrible things based on the circumstances, and a stranger, rather that. It was a stormy night, and I had just finished my late shift at the pizzeria when my boss asked me if I could do an extra delivery. It was past midnight and I was exhausted, but I needed the extra cash. So I accepted the job without hesitation. I grabbed the pizza and headed out into the stormy weather. The bright flashes of lightning and the loud claps of thunder made me wish I had stayed back at the pizzeria. But I drove on towards my destination, the only house on a western trail out of town. As I got closer, I began to feel uneasy about the darkness that surrounds the house. Suddenly, my headlights illuminated the house, and my apprehension about the place only increased. The house looked old and worn out, with crumbling paint and a decrepit porch. But worst of all, the windows were all boarded up, and that thought sent shivers down my spine. Nonetheless, work is work, and I pulled up in front of the house, hoping that I'd get my task over with quickly. I stepped out of the car and was immediately hit by a powerful gust of wind and an intense feeling of dread. I ran up to the front door, but there was no doorbell, so I had to knock on the door. After what felt like an eternity, the door slowly creaked open, crying out in agony. All I could see was impenetrable darkness from the inky black hallway of the house. The storm picked up in intensity, and the howling wind had me looking over my shoulder the entire time. Suddenly, a voice called out from the darkness, beckoning me to come inside. It was soft and almost whisper-like. I hesitated, but I couldn't lose the chance to make some extra money that night. So with trepidation, I stepped inside. The smell inside was pungent, a mix of mold, damp, and an overpowering stench so bad that I instantly gagged. I took a small torch out of my pocket and lit the foyer. That's when I saw an eerie figure at the end of the hallway, a figure that sent chills down my spine. It was a figure I couldn't quite make out, but as I approached it, I realized that it was an old woman. Her hair was tangled and greasy, and she wore a stained nightgown that hung off her bony frame. She was holding a candle, which barely cast enough light to illuminate her twisted features. Despite my instincts telling me to leave, I knew I couldn't abandon the pizza delivery. I cautiously made my way towards her, my eyes fixed on the pizza box in my hand. But as I drew closer, something about her made me feel uneasy. Just as I was about to hand her the pizza, a bolt of lightning illuminated the room. It froze me in my tracks as I saw her face up close for the first time. Her eyes were empty sockets, and her mouth was a black, gaping hole. Something about her was just not right. It was like she was an apparition. Lightning struck once more, illuminating the room, and I saw her moving towards me. That's when I felt like something was grabbing my ankle tightly. The old woman stopped in her tracks, turned around, and stared off at a far-off corner. For a few seconds it seemed like she wasn't seeing me, but she was seeing something else. Almost like she was just a body that something else would use to communicate. Thinking quickly, I snapped out of my shock and sprinted towards the door. I could feel something pulling me back and I nearly stumbled and fell, but I managed to scramble out of there. Once I was outside, I decided to look back, only to see nothing except for darkness and that long, uninhabited house behind me. Reflecting back on it whilst driving back towards the safety of the pizzeria, I realized what I saw was completely beyond anything logical that's happening. It felt like something lured me over in that house, something that was not quite human. And rushing thoughts of novels I heard of demon possessions and hauntings compelled me to run for cover. Needless to say, I quit my job the next day. I dared not give that house another thought, fearful that simply thinking of it would transport Menem.